Or if it's better than music, it's jazz.
Well, hello and welcome to this second year of the Backward Glance, a retro look at some of my personal favorite episodes from 4 of the most iconic Star Trek series of yesteryear: Classic Trek, The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager. In year 1, I began this series to remember and reminisce on those Star Trek stories of special meaning and significance to me, and in this, the second year of the Backward Glance, I'd like to continue with more retro looks at the Star Treks of those days gone by. Of course, on this end of the conversation is your speaker and fellow fan, Lal Winstrom, and I invite you to join me for these explorations and reflections as we think not only on the episodes themselves, but on the times and events that shaped them. And we'll do it all with a jazzy twist. We'll twist things up with a selection from guitarist Nils Jiptner from his 2005 release Pacific Coast Highway. This is Summer Nights, which we'll sample throughout the video. Let's begin this round now with one of my favorite chapters from the classic series period, and join Captain James T. Kirk and the original crew of the Enterprise in their Day of the Dove.
An entire human colony. A whole settlement. 100 men, women, and children. Who did it? Why? Kirk here.
Spock here, Captain. Sensors have picked up a Klingon ship, closing fast.
Reflectors on, condition red. Protect yourselves. Total reply if attacked. So that's the answer. Klingons.
Trouble aboard the Klingon ship. Evidence of explosions. Massive destruction.
Captain, the enemy ship is drifting, totally disabled. And we never fired upon her.
Maintain red alert.
You attacked my ship. 400 of my crew dead. Kirk, my ship is disabled. I claim yours. You are now prisoners of the Klingon Empire against which you have committed a wanton act of war.
We have quite a dramatic opening to this episode, with the Federation and Klingon sides mutually recriminating each other for the attack and subsequent deaths of their peoples. Captain Kirk and a party consisting of Dr. McCoy, Ensign Pavel Chekhov, and Security Officer Johnson are the first to beam down to the planet Beta-12A to investigate the sudden disappearance of a human colony, only to find it completely destroyed and with no traces left. Soon after comes Klingon Commander Kang and his own party, who swiftly and without regard for investigating the facts, backhands Kirk to the ground and immediately accuses the captain of attacking his ship without provocation. But, as we see, in the background looms a mysterious entity that appears to be overlooking it all. Meanwhile, in true Klingon fashion, Kang promises retribution by torturing the Starfleet landing party to death, until Captain Kirk reveals why he attacked Kang's ship and what other subsequent orders he was acting under. This threat prompts Ensign Chekhov to curse the Klingons and accuse them of murdering his brother on the planet Arcanus 4. Now, this is the first sign that something is wrong with this picture, but as the audience, as of yet, we're not clued into what. We just see that an abnormally behaving Pavel Chekhov has just blown his stack in a most spiteful and vindictive manner. Kang orders Kirk to transport everyone up to the Enterprise, and calls Kirk an animal for surrendering so easily to his demands. As an aside, when I watched this episode as a young lad, I asked myself, Even with Chekhov effectively subdued and Kirk under the watchful eye of two Klingon disruptors, why Dr. McCoy and Mr. Johnson didn't rush the Klingons and try to overpower them. After all, when you look at the tactical situation here, it would have been a near-even fight, numerically speaking, with the Klingons only slightly outnumbering our Starfleet heroes by 5 against 4. Not a big advantage numerically, mind you, but maybe a bigger one than you'd first think, given the Klingon strength advantage. Of course, a simpler answer would be that the crew were just following their captain's lead, and he had not initiated such a counterattack against their captors, so they remained as they were. Besides, Captain Kirk has a more clever solution than a fist fight in this instance. He covertly signals the Enterprise to initiate a transporter security protocol that alerts Spock that he and the landing party are being held under duress, and to beam up only the landing party and suspend all others in the transport buffer, a protocol that we'll see used again and again in the succeeding series of the 1980s through early 2000s. But once on board the Enterprise, Scotty soon brings word of another trouble sign. He tells Kirk that they cannot raise Starfleet Command on any hailing frequency, an occurrence that should not be happening given their relative position still well within Federation space. But still, no one really sees the full picture of the problem that is emerging. By this time, Kang and the rest of the surviving Klingons have beamed aboard the Enterprise, including Kang's wife Mara, who, once there, proceeds to spout Klingon state propaganda about Federation death camps and torture. Now, her inclusion here is significant for a few different reasons. Number one, the disinformation she declares, which will be echoed, but only from the other side, by a Starfleet officer later in the episode. Number two, Mara is the first ever Klingon female seen in Star Trek, and even though there is at least one other female who shows up in this program, she is in the background, where Mara is a leading character in the story. Now, of course, she will not be the last Klingon woman to grace the Star Trek universe as it expands throughout the years, but for now, being the first is quite significant. Meanwhile, the alien entity which we saw in the teaser has managed to sneak aboard the ship and is now stalking the halls unseen, while stoking hatred and distrust between the Klingon and Starfleet personnel. As the landing party heads toward the bridge, we get yet our next sign that something is amiss. Our people are not only acting out of character, but increasingly so. The next individual to begin spitting hateful words and attitudes toward the Klingons is Dr. McCoy himself, a man who rarely rushes to such prejudicial judgments, but who soon joins Chekhov in incriminating the Klingons for the attack on Beta 12A without any solid proof. In fact, he asks,
"What proof do we need? We know what a Klingon is."
Now this is an axiomatic assumption made not just about Klingon behavior, but about fundamental Klingon nature, implying that it is treacherous, deceitful, vicious, and innately violent, and without any redeeming quality whatsoever. It is absolutely not the way a Starfleet officer and supposedly enlightened human should think and believe. But there, McCoy and Chekhov both are. And thus far, while Kirk has noticed and become skeptical of his men's attitudes, he's not yet bothered to look deeper into why they're acting in such odd and, I dare say, offensive manners. Now, as the Starfleet personnel are increasingly losing their cool, Kang, in true Klingon fashion, is plotting with his people how to capture the Enterprise, his original plan having gone afoul, still under the belief that his own ship was sneak-attacked by Kirk in a Federation plot to start a war. Everyone we see is making assumptions, false assumptions, based on incorrect conclusions rooted in fear and prejudice, but with absolutely no evidence whatsoever. At the same time, no one yet understands that they are all being used in a game being played by a higher power currently beyond their comprehension. And thus the abnormalities in character behavior continue as our next example of, shall we say, weirdness occurs. Lieutenant Uhura, a normally soothing voice of calm and reasoned dialogue between others, throws one of her communications devices to the floor in anger and shouts to Captain Kirk that she is still unable to raise Starfleet command on any subspace channel. She, too, now joins the chorus of officers accusing the Klingons of treachery. But now the entity finally makes its grand play and hurtles the Enterprise toward the end of the Milky Way galaxy at high warp speeds and traps over 400 Enterprise personnel below decks in order to create an equal number of Klingon versus Starfleet forces on board. Naturally, Captain Kirk accuses Kang, who, though he takes amusement in the situation, flatly denies any involvement. Kirk returns the humiliating punch Kang struck him with earlier, and without warning, swords of all type suddenly appear out of thin air. Now the entity's game is afoot, and the engineered fight between the Starfleet and Klingon personnel is on, as Kirk and his men battle their way back to the bridge. Once there, he informs Spock of the dire situation and how the Klingons have armed themselves with edged weapons in keeping with their dueling tradition. But Spock, thinking more soberly, tells him,
Captain, neither the Klingon technology nor ours is capable of this. The instantaneous transmutation of matter. I doubt that they are responsible.
Therefore, there must be another explanation. Tensions escalate to a froth when Chekhov now demands to go after the Klingons himself on a quest of personal revenge for his dead brother and storms off the bridge in defiance of Kirk's orders. Sulu now tells Kirk that Chekhov never even had a brother and that he is an only child. Eventually, Spock's meticulous efforts isolate the alien life form, and together he and Kirk slowly hammer together the truth of their situation. Everyone's accusatory and aggressive behavior, a phantom distress call from a non-existent human colony, Chekhov's passionate belief in a murdered brother who never was, weapons materializing out of nowhere. Now the pieces of this illogical and incongruent puzzle are beginning to make sense. There is a powerful alien being on board that is at work and that has strategized this whole situation and manipulated both the Klingon and Starfleet armies into a well-calculated conflict designed to meet its own ends. But what ends? Whatever they are, Kirk realizes that Kang too must be made to understand where the real battle lies if they are to stop the fighting and defeat the entity. But on hearing this, the still alien-energized Dr. McCoy angrily rages against Kirk and Spock's plan and reproaches them for dereliction of duty in the face of the enemy. He makes the same hard recriminations against the Klingons that Mara before made against the Federation.
If our backs would turn, they'd jump us in a minute. And you know what Klingons do to prisoners. Slave labor, death planets, experiments.
I've heard of their atrocities, their death camps. They will torture us for our scientific and military information.
In the interval, the Klingons have captured Mr. Scott's turf, engineering, which prompts the enraged man to scramble onto the bridge and blame Kirk for the tactical setback. As a result of his alien-induced rage, Scotty is provoked into a conflict with Spock, who also succumbs to the alien's influence and almost pummels Scotty to death. Kirk stops it all, but soon asks a pointed question in wake of the events.
Has a war been staged for us, complete with weapons and ideology and patriotic drumbeating, even race hatred?
Which Spock answers.
Apparently, it is by design that we fight. We seem to be pawns.
We seem to be pawns, Spock says, in a much larger order of conflict than the mere petty squabbles currently at work. for much more nefarious and self-serving reasons than the supposedly highfalutin notions they have been indoctrinated to believe in. And it is one of the chief lessons of the story that we will return to later. But this realization motivates Kirk and Spock even further to seek out Kang and put an end to this manufactured struggle before everyone succumbs to the entity's power. And this leads us into a depiction of a most despicable action that is indeed no stranger to warfare in the real or fictional worlds. As Mr. Chekhov sneaks through the corridors on a personal hunt of revenge, he incidentally comes across Mara, whom he tries to sexually assault. Captain Kirk and Spock intercept Chekhov in the moment of this reprehensible deed, and Kirk deals out no small amount of punishment to Chekhov for it. Now, I think it is important to look at this particular scene not simply as something that happens in the real world of warfare, where women are often the sexual victims of men in the lusts of combat, but also of women as the weaker vessel, if you will, especially during the period of 1960s television. It was during this time and beyond that TV dramas often showcased women as damsels in distress, requiring the help and protection of men to survive in a cruel and unfair world. And I think this element is played out here in this scene. Now, you must remember something else. As I said before, Mara is the first Klingon woman portrayed in Star Trek history, and as such, was not the strong, fierce Klingon female we've come to expect from the succeeding series, where we were graced with such warrior women as Kalar, the Duras sisters Lursa and B'Etor, and of course B'Elanna Torres of Star Trek Voyager fame. Had Mara been like any of these strong Klingon women, I would dare argue that Chekhov would not have been able to force his way upon her so easily, and he might have found, shall we say it in these terms, he may have found his posterior kicked up and down the hallway one side and then the other, something Mara would have done all by herself. But this scene also brings us to a pivot point in the story, because it opens up a window of opportunity for Kirk to gain Mara as an ally in his effort to persuade Kang to stop the fighting. Now, unfortunately, she does not believe him at first, even after being witness to the evidence presented later by Dr. McCoy to Kirk in sickbay.
Sword wounds in the vital organs, massive trauma, shock. They're all healing at a fantastic rate.
And then, more pointedly, after personally witnessing the entity for herself alongside Kirk and Spock in the corridor. It is because of their encounter with the entity in the corridor that the captain and first officer are able to surmise its weakness and how to defeat it.
It exists on the hate of others.
And it has acted as a catalyst, creating this situation. In order to satisfy that need, all hostile attitudes on board must be eliminated. The fighting must end, and soon.
And this must be done before the ship's dilithium crystals drain to power zero, leaving the Enterprise a dead hulk forever drifting in space at the mercy of a hate-voracious alien. Kirk, Spock, and Scotty come up with a last gambit and beam Kirk and Mara into engineering to confront Kang with the truth. Kang and Kirk battle while the entity looks on, spurring further the wrath and distrust between the two sides. Kang tries to murder Kirk even as his wife attempts to intervene, until finally Kang is won over by seeing the alien for himself. After which, the two sides cease hostilities, and the entity departs the ship. Now, I wanted to ponder a moment on what we can take from this episode, because there are considerations here. To do that, I think it good to take a brief look at what was going on when Day of the Dove aired back in 1968. What influenced this episode? Well, 1968 was a wrenching year in world affairs and in the American social fabric also. Some very important and unsettling things had already occurred by the time this episode aired on November 1st that year, including the assassinations of civil rights activist and leader the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Senator Robert F. Kennedy, brother of the late U.S. President John F. Kennedy, whom at this point in time had himself been assassinated only 5 years earlier. In addition to these heinous events, the 1968 Democratic Convention in the American city of Chicago, Illinois, saw a series of violent anti-war protests and clashes with local law enforcement. These riots were the cause of disaffection with United States involvement in Vietnam and with the American political and social establishment more generally, with the American presence there being a product of the Cold War and the U.S.'s efforts to contain the spread of international communism in that nation. In regard to that, a profound military action known as the Tet Offensive had already been well underway by the conclusion of 1968, from its initial and most important phase in January all the way to its third and final phase in September. The goal of the Tet Offensive was the destabilization by the communist-controlled North of its neighbor South Vietnam. Ultimately, the offensive failed in its primary objective, but it had the secondary effect of demoralizing support for the war in the West, particularly in the States, because of the high number of military casualties suffered as a result of American involvement. This is the setting that befalls Day of the Dove, and what we can see articulated in its allegorical illustration of the struggle between the communist and non-communist world, as represented by the Klingon and Starfleet services in the episode. But there's more than that, because the episode also asks us to ponder if all of our patriotic drum beating, our slogans, our flags, our national chest thumping, and, at the last, the strategic and political goals we claim to fight for are truly what is at stake, or whether there are larger, more unseen, more concealed goals which our political and social elite keep from us in order to serve their own more selfish agendas. It asks us to look beyond the obvious explanation toward the possibility of machinations behind the veil, and question whether we are in fact pawns and toys in a great game. Indeed, when he's trying to influence Kang to stop fighting, Kirk uses these very words.
Be a pawn. Be a toy. Be a good soldier that never questions orders.
And in this case, in the episode, the alien entity represents that kind of concealed agenda, where warfare is used to hide rationalizations for conflict that in reality have nothing, or very little, to do with the actual reasons people are engaged in hostilities. Now, don't misunderstand. I'm not attempting to use this video as a means to sway you one way or the other as to whether American involvement in Vietnam was right or wrong. I leave that to an actual historical analysis, which it is not my purpose here to conduct. I am, however, articulating some of the real-world circumstances that molded Day of the Dove into the story it became. And it is that message, one that calls upon us to draw back the curtains and see the men behind them, that, in my opinion, makes this both an entertaining but also supremely thoughtful offering of the original series. This has been your Jazz Cat Lal Winstrom on this end, thanking you for joining me in this backward glance at Day of the Dove, and I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. Along our journey, you've been listening to veteran jazz master Nils Jiptner in Summer Nights from his 2005 release, Pacific Coast Highway. As I return this year with more backward glances at the Star Treks of yesteryear, I look forward to sharing more with you when we come together once again to reminisce and remember those days gone by. Until then, to all of you Star Trek fans of good character and noble ideals, to you in whom that flame of the upward reach of man still burns fervently, I bid you live long and prosper. And remember, as Commander Riker said, it's better than music, it's jazz.